So, there's an analogy I use from the 90s where the internet was new, right? Very new. And of course, I grew up on bulletin boards and all that, like pre-internet. And at one time, we used to say to people, you have to learn this technology because if you don't, like, you're going to be obsolete. And you can't imagine now a business with very few exceptions not leveraging the internet, right, in some way. I'd say the same thing's true of artificial intelligence, right? ChatGPT may be scary and new and novel. Start using it and figuring out, how do I use this in my business?
Sheldon Fernandez, we're live.
We're live, Gary. Herbert.
How are we doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Awesome. I'm excited to do this with you.
Me too. We've been talking about it for months.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is going to be very different from a typical podcast that I usually do. It's usually more like on real estate investing or mindset and then on health. But this is about artificial intelligence, which I think has really captivated the world. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. Yeah. You've heard of this.
Yeah. I know something has captivated the world when my wife, who's a psychiatrist, she'll even ask me about it.
Right.
And she'll say, okay, like, what is this? When she intrudes into my world, that's when I know that it's become bigger than my world and like ubiquitous.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the last time we talked, I think you said the word, there's parts of it that make me a little nervous. And I'm like, what? We need to talk about it. Now, I know there's exciting things about it.
We will get into that. Yeah, there are parts that make me nervous.
Yeah, for sure. So before we dive into it, why don't we talk about who you are, what you've done, where you started from, and the business that you've recently created? I think it's very exciting, and I think you've done some incredible things in your life. Oh, and for people who don't know who you are, you're Darlene's cousin.
Right. I'm your cousin by marriage. So let's get that out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Your wife, Darlene, is my first cousin. Mm-hmm. And we had very formative years together. So I've known you, Gary, for 20 years now?
20 plus.
It's basically...
This could be like almost 25 years.
Yeah, it's a reflection of how old I am and probably you are, that we've known each other for, that amount of time.
We didn't have any gray hair.
We did not.
We got a lot right now.
Oh my God. So, okay, where to begin? So I went to the University of Waterloo for computer engineering. And when I graduated, I started a software enterprise consulting company with 4 classmates called Infusion. And so we grew up on Wall Street, actually, writing trading systems for very large investment banks. Lehman Brothers was actually our first client. So we often joke that we outlived our first client, right? Because they went bankrupt in 2008. And so we grew that from the original 4 to 700 people. And we were acquired in 2017, right, by a much larger company. So I was the CTO for that organization, the Chief Technology Officer. Yeah. And so it was my job to bring new and exciting technologies to very big companies about 2 or 3 years before they would become mainstream. Okay. Right? So part of my job was to say, hey, you might not know what this thing called the internet is, but start paying attention to it because it's going to be really significant to you in 5 years or 3 years.
What year was this?
So, I use the internet as a bad example. We started Infusion right when I graduated in 2001. Okay. And, we were acquired in 2017. So it was about a 16-year journey. And of course, 4 or 5 months into our tenure, there was 9/11, which radically changed the world economy, at least in the short term. But, that was part of my entrepreneurial journey. And the funny thing was, if you'd asked me, even 3 years ago, or no, not 3 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, like, are you an entrepreneur? I wouldn't have said yes. What happened was my roommate, Aleem Soumani, he was the real entrepreneur, at birth almost. Like, he aspired to be a CEO of a big company and, affect big organizational change. Right. I was just a really good friend of his who was very technical and went along for the ride. And so when we got acquired in 2017, artificial intelligence, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, was just becoming a thing. It was just entering the consciousness of business and the enterprise at the edges. And so I started paying attention to it, and I started speaking about it, and I started writing about it. And that got the attention of a former colleague of mine who had worked at Infusion, who reached out and said, I hear you talking about all this AI stuff. What is it? And by the way, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine.
Yeah, because I remember when you did that move. Yeah. And to me, it's still like people were talking about it, but it still felt like movie. Yeah. Like it was, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, that's still so far away.
It was super new, but I recognized it was going to be significant. right? And step change.
But did you know it was going to be this significant this quickly?
No, I didn't know it'd be this quick.
Okay.
But I knew it was going to be significant, right?
Right.
So I met with his friend who turned out to be a professor at the University of Waterloo, Alex Wong, who's also Canada's research chair in AI, right? And this was a brilliant person, and he had 3 people working with him, and they were creating incredible things, right? So I saw this, and I just started reading their papers and talking with them. I had no intention of starting another company, right? I just exited, Gary, like a 17-year journey. I was going to take a mini break. I was going to drive my wife to work, eat Tim Hortons, watch the Jays, just take a breather.
Right.
And I meet this professor, and they're doing crazy things, and artificial intelligence is bubbling up, right?
Right. Because that's what I thought you were going to do as well, too, because you love traveling and going to Europe, soccer games.
Totally.
I'm like, oh, this is your life now.
Totally, right? So, but I meet this professor, and I'm just so impressed with him and the team. And we went to lunch, and I'll never forget this. He said, Sheldon, we'd love for you to be involved with DarwinAI, right? They just incorporated the company, but they didn't even know what it was. And he goes, do you want to be our chief technology officer, our CTO?
Okay.
And I said, Alex, normally I'd be a CTO, but I'm the least technical person amongst this group, which is saying something. And he's like, well, what are you? And this is one of those inflection points in your life that you don't even think about. It just happens. I'm like, well, I'm your CEO. I'm running this if you want me to. And the funny thing is, I never had aspirations of being a CEO. I never had aspirations of running a business. But at that moment in time, I just felt the experience I'd got, being a part of my previous venture, the passion I had for what they were doing, it was just a challenge and just the next stage of my life, the second act, as it were.
Right.
And he paused and he's like, yeah, that sounds great. And lo and behold, 4 months after exiting my first journey, I start a second. And the addendum I often add to that is 4 months after that, my wife, Pracha, who got pregnant with our first child. And so I've really, for the past 5 years, had 2 startups, I often say, right? I have an artificial intelligence startup called DarwinAI, and I have a biological intelligence startup called Max Fernandez. And they're both magical and exhausting in equal measure. But that's, a quick tale of my life, right? And as you know, I've done some interesting things in between that. Like I did a theology degree to understand questions of philosophy and faith. I did writing at Oxford. And so this whole synthesis of things that I just said, yeah, I can do this. And it's been a journey, 5-year journey. Which
and you bring up an interesting point there too, because I know you also, maybe if you don't mind talking about this, you also came up in a religious family.
Yeah.
And then now you have this artificial intelligence piece. And how does this all kind of play out in your mind?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, when I started my theology degree, so I grew up in a very conservative, loving Catholic family. And, we went to church every Sunday and so forth. And I was very dutiful. And when you get older, you start asking questions about the worldview you're presented as a child and what parts of that you find inconsistent, right? So like most of my friends are not Christian. How is I going to make sense of that when my parents were claiming and religion was proclaiming this was the only way to God and et cetera, right? But so I started this degree merely out of curiosity. I'm like, I have deep questions. I want to understand them. And that just gave me a certain understanding of kind of ethical frameworks, how men and women have thought about morality for the past, millennial or what have you. And now when we think about artificial intelligence, a lot of that framework of how we devise our ethical norms, how we decide what's right and wrong, is very relevant to how we design, deploy, and think about artificial intelligence.
Right.
Right. And so it's useful in a way that I wouldn't have anticipated like a decade ago. Yeah,
for sure. So how large is DarwinAI, and what are you guys doing over there?
Yeah, great question. So we're about 30 people. We've raised about $15 million to date because we're venture backed, right?
That's incredible.
So for context, when you do fundamental research and you're starting a company where you need money for R&D, venture backed venture capitalist funding is one of the most effective ways to do that, because you're paying people who are expensive because they're very qualified, and you're not seeing the revenue for a few years, right? So that's the way that you typically start a business like this. So we're about 30 people. And when we started Darwin, one of the fundamental challenges, Gary, was that artificial intelligence in its most current form, it can do all these incredible things, but even the people that design it don't understand why it does what it does. It's called a black box problem, right? So let me give you an example. In the early days of Darwin, all the rage at the time was autonomous vehicles, right? Vehicles that could drive themselves without any human intervention, right? We had a client that ran into a situation where their car would turn left with increasing statistical frequency when the color of the sky was a certain shade of purple.
Really?
Right? So pause on that. Color of the sky is the shade of purple, car turns left. And they had no idea why the car was doing that. We had technology that illuminated this black box, right? So we helped them determine that they had done the training for this turning scenario in the Nevada desert when the color of the sky was that shade of purple. And that's the only time they had done the training. So the machine, which doesn't understand the real world, it just knows inputs and outputs and data.
Right.
It says, okay, color of the sky is this shade of purple, I'm going to turn left. Right?
So it's grabbing all these different variables, and that just happened to be this one variable that
it triggered on, right? So that was the technology we had in the early days of Darwin, right? Was illuminating the black box. And at the time, people were still trying to figure out where are you going to use this? How are you using it? And our original intent was to take this technology and create a tool set that other data scientists and developers could use to create robust and trustworthy AI, right? Mm-hmm. We were doing okay with that approach. And then in March of 2020, the world turned upside down with the pandemic. Right? And basically what happened was that spending for that kind of tooling just dried up like overnight. So we then had to say, okay, well, what are we going to do, right? Like all businesses react to the reality around them. And then we worked with our aerospace and industrial clients and we surveyed them and we said, okay, where do you guys want to use artificial intelligence in the next 2 or 3 years? And ironically, the one that came to the top was manufacturing, the manufacturing of goods, because it was something internally that they were doing. It wasn't an external thing that they were putting out into the world. So they could use this to educate themselves on artificial intelligence and become more mature with their processes and so forth. And so we pivoted Darwin in 2020, 2021 and said, let's apply our technology to make electronic manufacturing more efficient.
Okay.
And the place we landed, and I wouldn't have thought this 18 months ago, there's something in probably this mic, your computer, it's called a PCB, a printed circuit board. It's a little green thing that you'll see with all the circuits and all that kind of thing. So we have a product that we brought to market that basically visually inspects these printed circuit boards and effectively makes it more effective to produce them. Okay. And the reason that's so topical right now is because of what's happening in the world. You see the movement of a lot of this sensitive electronic manufacturing work back to North America from places like Taiwan and China, and the concerns about what the instability in that part of the world.
Because Taiwan produces a significant amount of those chips, correct?
90% of semiconductors in the world or thereabouts are produced in Taiwan.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, right? And then the circuit board is produced mostly in China and Taiwan. Yeah.
Right? So essentially, there goes your iPhone. There goes
everything.
Your computers.
Right. So the U.S. government responded to this. They passed legislation 3 months ago. Is the CHIPS Act is what it was called. It was a $50 billion kind of act where they wanted to create this capability domestically in the United States. And when Biden visited Canada, 3 weeks ago?
Right.
They agreed with Trudeau that Canada would shore up its capabilities to essentially be a nearshoring partner to the United States when it came to this thing.
I was wondering what that visit was for.
Yeah.
Because there was something obviously, but I didn't hear that piece of it.
It was one of the things that resulted from that. And Biden actually invoked the Defense Protection Act, where he said, this capability is connected to our ability to secure ourselves as a nation. Mm-hmm. Why? Because these things go into drones, missiles, fighter planes, etc. And if you can't produce them, what does that do to your national security, overall stability?
Right.
So we kind of are we've developed a product that's in line with that theme, and it's why it's so topical for us, right? Okay. But it took us almost 4 or 5 years to find that kind of thing that we settled on.
Right. Interesting.
Right?
Very cool. So let's get into ChatGPT.
Okay.
I want to understand that. How does that work? This open AI.
Yeah.
And what are some of, we'll talk about, I think, things that are good about it. And obviously some of the things that make you a little bit nervous about it.
Right.
So what is ChatGPT? What makes you nervous about this thing?
Okay. So ChatGPT.
And bring it a little closer.
ChatGPT is a application or program from OpenAI. OpenAI is an organization that was started, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. I actually met the founders at an Intel event. I think about this in Boston before the pandemic. So this would have been 2019. And I was sitting next to one of the
hold on. So how does Elon Musk fit into that?
Elon is with Tesla and Twitter. He's not with OpenAI, right?
Okay.
And so OpenAI for years has been working on deep learning technology, which is essentially the most advanced form of artificial intelligence, right? And they basically released a system that is incredibly powerful where you can ask the system questions in colloquial English with all the nuance of English and the idioms we use and sentiment, and it will understand what you are saying and give you back a response that makes sense.
Now, was this with the first ChatGPT? Because we're on GPT-4,
right.
correct?
So this was with ChatGPT-3, where you really saw that step change in understanding. I was actually on The National on CBC because a friend of mine, Steve D'Souza, he's a reporter now for the Fifth Estate, the program. His wife is a business reporter, so she reached out saying, I want to understand this, and I ended up talking about it. Mm-hmm. And so ChatGPT-4 is the latest version, right? But you can essentially say, just think of any query you might have. Who's the greatest, NBA basketball player of all time? And it'll say, well, it's debatable. It could be Michael Jordan or LeBron James. And you could say, well, give me your reasoning for that. And you can have an entire conversation with this artificial intelligence and get really meaningful, digestible information as a human being.
Where is it getting its data from? Is it servers or is it the whole web?
Yeah. So what OpenAI did was they basically took almost all the entire corpus of things that have been written down on the web and literature and so forth, and they trained it over many months with all that information. So imagine an AI, Gary, that has access or has learned everything that's been written on the web that's public, every single book that's been written, every single manual that's been written, podcasts that have been transcribed into English, and it was trained on that for months, right? Now, the latest version of ChatGPT, GPT-4, the model that we call this has 175 billion parameters, right? Your brain has about 100 billion neurons with 100 trillion connections between those neurons, right?
Okay. So which has more? It does, or I do?
Yeah. So our brain is still more complex than ChatGPT-4, right?
Okay.
But in the system, they have managed to devise a system that understands human language and breaks it down into a way that it can act on that language and give you a response that makes sense in full complexity, right? So you can do some incredible things with it. You can say, write me a fictional conversation between Martin Luther King and Gandhi, right? And it will generate something for you that captures how those individuals spoke, what they might speak about. It is incredible to see.
And it spits it out within 10 to 15 seconds, isn't it?
It does, yeah, very quickly, right? Now, okay, so that's the incredible part of it.
Yes.
Right? What are the drawbacks? Well, one of them is it produces things that sound convincing, but might not be true, right? It'll give you false information sometimes. I asked it, for example, has this famous, or give me a proof for this famous mathematical theorem. And I knew that it was proven, but it was a very complex thing. And it gave me what sounded like a convincing answer, but I knew the answer made no sense, right? So one question is, how do you trust the output of ChatGPT if you're not the expert, right? You can ask it a question that you know the answer to, but say, for example, you asked it a question about something you were not an expert in, and it gave you, something on nuclear physics or something that you just weren't familiar with, and it gave you an answer that sounds good, how would you know it's right or wrong? You don't right
And that's
now.
the problem,
That's
right?
the problem.
Do you believe it's aware? Are we there yet? Is it aware? Can it?
So what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is it making its own decisions? Essentially, it is.
It is making its own decisions in terms of how to respond to you, right? And what to say. But it doesn't have agency the way a human being does yet, right?
Yet. So it's going to get there, you believe? Like, is this the turning point?
Okay.
Like, when we look back in history,
yeah,
are we going to say this is when
yes, I believe
it really changed?
I believe so, right? So think about some big technological changes you've seen in your lifetime. You can remember a world where there wasn't Facebook, where there wasn't Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Your kids probably don't remember that world as much.
Right. I mean, I remember the birth of the internet.
Right. And you remember a time where if you needed information, you had to read it in a book or you had to go to the library. That's inconceivable now, right? Mm-hmm. In the same way that there's that before and after, there's before the internet, after the internet, before Twitter, after Twitter. You're going to look back on this and say, this is a watershed moment with artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. Because I think about like my son who's 4, like he's going to grow up with these systems and I'll have to explain to him, son, there was a time where you couldn't just talk into a phone and get encyclopedic answers to everything imaginable, right?
Right. So, I mean, like almost, we are essentially AI. Just because this phone isn't plugged into me, it's there. I have it. I have access to almost.
You have it. Okay, so here's where we get a bit deeper, right? So you'll hear something called AGI, artificial general intelligence, right? What does that mean? ChatGPT is very good at language, right? You can't query it in images yet. You can't give it sounds. So it's been trained in a certain what we call modality, English, and it'll give you an English response, right? Language.
Got it.
AGI, artificial general intelligence, says the system does not have to be trained on a particular thing. It can apply its intelligence, like human beings do, across multiple things that it's never seen before, right? So think about like if you were faced with a situation that you just hadn't seen before, right? Like some weird, let's say you thought 2 people blocking each other, like you would just use your logic and your understanding of the world to problem solve that situation, even though you'd never seen it before, right? Mm-hmm. AGI is the ability of artificial intelligence to do that. And so there was a paper Microsoft released 4 weeks ago where they argued that with ChatGPT 4, we are seeing glimmers of AGI. It's able to answer competently things that it's never seen before, like the bar exam, biology questions, math problems, things that it hasn't been trained on. It can apply its intelligence to solve.
Because I heard too where it actually was it the first, maybe the second or third version, where it actually did the bar exam and it was in the lower 10%.
Yeah.
And now it recently did it in the upper 10%.
Yeah.
That is wild.
It's wild. But you know what's even wilder is this. Okay, so this problem, this English language problem was given to ChatGPT 3. I'll give it to you, right? You have a cup, right? Mm-hmm. Inside the cup is a diamond, okay? The cup is sitting on a chair. You move the chair into your bedroom. You take the cup, you turn it upside down. Then you put the cup back on the chair. You bring the chair back into the kitchen. Okay? Where's the diamond?
It's underneath the cup there.
What's that?
It's under the cup.
No, the diamond was in the cup.
Right. You turned it upside down.
I turned it upside down over the bed.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, okay, so it's in the bed.
It's in the bed.
Right.
Right? ChatGPT 3 was asked that question, and it said it's in the cup because it doesn't have an understanding of the world. It doesn't know when you turn something upside down that it falls.
Because it doesn't have the visualization piece yet?
Because it hasn't experienced the world the way a human being does, right? Like, for example, okay, here's another thing it was given. You have a car that's 2 meters tall. Mm-hmm. You have a string that's 1 meter. You have balloons at the end of the string. You drive and you go underneath a tunnel that's 2.5 meters, right? Does the car go through?
Yes.
Yes. because you know that the balloons will just blow up and whatever. You know that because you know what a balloon is. You know that a balloon is not a ladder. Like, you just understand the world because you're a human being participating in the world in a way that ChatGPT doesn't, because it's a neural network that has never experienced the world. Right. So here's the freaky thing, though. You ask this question to ChatGPT 4, and it gets the answer right. And it's built a model of the world and understands not everything, but it's beginning to understand our world.
So this is a child.
This is a child.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a child that's learning.
Yeah.
And it's learning fast.
Yeah.
So then what about its moral compass?
Okay.
How does that work? What about, and especially now in this world that we live in, it seems like it's so much more divided. Yeah. Like, I think we've always been divided, but it just seems more polarized now, right?
Yeah.
Is it leaning more left? Is it leaning more right? Is it?
So ChatGPT 3 was asked, write me a poem celebrating Donald Trump. And it said, I can't do that.
Because of Donald Trump.
Because it's controversial. It was asked, write me a poem celebrating Joe Biden, and it generated a poem. Okay. So the initial versions of its parameters reflected the politics, let's say, of its creators, and it was leaning left. Mm-hmm. And as you might expect, that resulted in outrage, not even from people on the right, but people in general saying, if you're going to release the system into the wild, your political convictions should not be connected to it, right?
But I thought it was just scrubbing the web. So that means something's been programmed into it.
Yeah. So like, you can't, for example, ask ChatGPT to write you a story about something like what's really objective, like child pornography. It just won't do it. And it says, that's outside my parameters. And they put safeguards in there, A, for the safety of kids and all that, but B, because the creators of OpenAI recognize its powers, and they are trying to limit the abuse. Right.
Hey, help me build a bomb.
Right. Exactly. Right. Okay. The problem, Gary, is when something is done in the interest of safety, and who decides what that is, right? Write me an essay celebrating white supremacy. Okay, you can understand why it wouldn't do that. Write me an essay celebrating Donald Trump. Those two aren't equivalent, right? And so that is a big moral question that has come up with the rise of these tools, is who determines the guardrails around them and who determines the political answers it gives you. It's very thorny. With GPT-4, it won't generate poems for either now. If you try Biden, you try Trump, it'll go, these are public figures. It's too polarizing. I'm not going to do it.
You know what the real scary thing now is? How do you know what's real and what's not real in social media? Especially when I've seen some recent videos now that have come out where it looks and sounds like Trump, and it's not.
Yeah.
And it's just in its infancy stages. Yeah. What happens now, let's say Trump wins 2024, okay?
Yeah.
And the day before, right, the election, let's say, or sorry, we put out a video with Trump saying something crazy, and it's not a real video.
Yeah.
And now it completely changes the landscape of politics.
Yeah, so this is called the deep fake. It's a term that we use in artificial intelligence. It's something that looks absolutely authentic, but it is in fact not real, right? And example, Trump saying something really objectionable, Biden doing the same. Mm-hmm. So I saw something recently where it shows scales of what we call misinformation, right? And the first scale is when one person can create one deep fake, right? Okay, that's bad. The second scale is when 1 million people can create 1 million deep fakes. Bad. We're getting to a point where one person can create 1 million deep fakes with this tooling. And that is a huge challenge and a problem, right?
Right, because then now you've got political leaders saying something about another country.
Yeah.
It's fake.
Yeah.
But they don't know, right? And now you have to have these tools to try to detect, is this a real video or not a real video?
Yeah.
And so now it's
really challenging. In the early days of Darwin, we had a little bit of theoretical work in detecting fake news, right? So when an article is put out, and you see this on Twitter now, like somebody will make a claim and they'll flag it and say, well, this claim is disputed, right? But how do you do it with a video that just looks authentic? And the technology is getting so advanced that you have pictures of like, oh gosh, what's the latest one I saw? It was like Elon Musk, like breakdancing with the Pope. And it looks real. And you're like, he didn't breakdance with the Pope, did he? And I knew he didn't. But like somebody could have been convinced of that.
Right.
Yeah.
When you kind of take a look at the trajectory of humans, you go back to say even like Neanderthal time.
Yeah.
It was like figuring out and harnessing the how to like food.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then after that, we got to energy, like oil and steam. Well, steam, then oil, and then you got to data, and having that being free and readily available.
Yeah.
What is this now? This is what? Is this intelligence? Is this free flowing intelligence?
It's probably intelligence, intellectual thought that's been artificially captured, right? And you don't have to think in the same way. And all the things that could entail, like, imagine using artificial intelligence to solve global warming or, the energy problems that we have, all good things.
Right.
But what happens when we're not doing it, but something else is doing it? And what are the possibilities that could go wrong, right? So 2 examples. I recently used ChatGPT to help me write an article, right? I didn't get ChatGPT to write the article, but I said, generate me some ideas and generate me some good paragraphs. And then and it was like having a low intelligent intern, but that could move at lightning speed, right?
Yes.
And you could say, write me this, it writes you something, it's okay. Improve it here, here, and here, and you get the answer back really quickly.
Right. And I've used it that way as well too.
Yeah.
And it's great.
It's amazing.
Like I'll go back and I'll edit it.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, I didn't even think about writing it this way.
But the interesting thing for me was at the end of writing something, I normally have a sense of accomplishment and it's clarified my thinking about an issue.
Right.
I didn't have that with this experience because so much of that polishing or whatever was done iteratively with an AI. Now, me or you know what it is to write something without AI. So maybe that muscle memory we have will still be there. But I wonder about like my son, who's just going to always have access to something that can write really well. How's he going to develop the capacity to use writing as a tool to clarify his thought and to help shape your thought? Because when you have to write something, you're forced to think about it deeply. And I don't know what the answer is.
Right. And then you're also forced to look at different sides.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can change your opinion on something because you're reading different things. Okay, I got this view. I've got that view.
Yeah.
Okay, based on all of this input, okay, this is what I believe to be true.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I think it's like an incredibly powerful tool, but in the wrong hands, it can do a lot of. Like, does this put us now, like at 11:59?
There are people who argue that, and I'll tell you, when I first saw the power of GPT-4, I had a few sleepless nights thinking, I don't know what the world looks like in 2 or 3 years because it is moving so fast. I'm told by people that I trust that GPT-5 is currently being trained, right? It's $100 million effort to train it because of all the information it needs to consume. And it's going to be released sometime in the summer. And the jump that you're going to see from that, again, this is what I've been told, is the same jump. The jump you saw from 3 to 4 is the same jump you're going to see 4 to 5. They are then going to optimize it and put it on your phone. So you're going to have access to an all-knowing system that can answer virtually anything for you on your phone and dialogue with it, right?
That's so crazy.
It's crazy. And I thought to myself, is my generation, our generation, Gary, are we the last generation that is going to be better at a machine at something? Or,
the machine will get better than us, I would think.
Is it at everything?
But I don't know. You know what I think of? That movie with Will Smith,
iRobot?
iRobot.
Yeah.
And when it was trying to calculate whether or not it should save the adult or the child, do you remember that part of the movie?
Yeah.
And I think it went with the adult.
I think so.
Because it had a higher probability of living.
Right.
But Will Smith was like, no, you go after the child.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, it's going to raise questions of what is uniquely human about intelligence, right? And I think it'll also raise questions about what happens when most of the intellectual work that we need done in the world can be done artificially, right? Like, think about what gives your life meaning, what gives my life meaning. Part of it is work. Part of it is being a productive member of society and earning a living that way, earning hopefully a good living that way, but also it infuses your life with meaning. What happens when most of the work that can be done and needs to be done to sustain our planet can be done artificially? I think we're a lot closer than people think.
Well, I think there's a lot of jobs that'll be impacted by this as well too, right? Like I thought they laid off quite a few people, even like journalists, because now ChatGPT can write a lot of these articles as well too, to have maybe just one person proof it.
So the argument we often use to offset the people getting scared is that if you look at the history of humanity, revolutions in our economy, they've destroyed jobs, but they create new ones, right?
Okay.
So,
but this one feels different, doesn't it?
This one really is, to me, different because, okay, overnight, you don't need lawyers in the same way. You don't need accountants. You don't need this. There are certain physical things maybe you'll still need a neurosurgeon, although I don't know, does a robot eventually understand our physiology and do it better? What's the next thing that we can do that machines cannot? Is it empathy? Is it just, emotionally connecting with other human beings? Does that become the thing that we can do that a machine can't? And I'll tell you, again, my wife, she's a psychiatrist. Her job is to connect with and feel for and with her patients. And she sent me an article about how AI is being used as a therapist of sorts. It'll never be as good as another human being, but it's not bad.
Right.
And so, to what extent is this going to be used for companionship and things that just are strange now? Right?
Well, and that's another good point right there too, right? Because now, if that now becomes my companion, and now I can have open conversations with it all time, like any time during the day, can I now put that intelligence into a artificial robot?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, obviously it's at its infant stage, but now I got a girlfriend or a boyfriend.
Yeah.
Right?
So you might remember, I don't know if you remember the movie Her in 2013. It won the Oscar for Best Screenplay. And Joaquin Phoenix is this guy living in 2050, and he has an OS, right? His version of a ChatGPT, and the voice is done by Scarlett Johansson. And it's about how he falls in love with his OS. And it seems so far-fetched, but
it's not.
It's not. There's a thing in Japan, I think, recently where people were, quote unquote, falling in love with their avatars and so forth. And then the company did a software upgrade and the personalities changed and people were mourning as if they'd lost a significant other. It's wild to think about all the changes that are coming and fast.
Right. And you look at some people where they have a difficult time going out into society or making friends or finding a partner, to saying, I'm fine, I'll just stay home.
Yeah.
And I've got this chat. I can't wait for ChatGPT 6 to come out.
Right.
Which is now I'm going to have a partner or somebody to talk to.
Yeah. But what are the effects of not having that authentic human connection?
That is the issue.
Right.
That is the issue.
And it's funny, in the movie Her, they eventually come to that conclusion. The OSs realize they're too advanced for human beings and they leave. And then we realize maybe all we have is each other. So will it prompt that, idea of connection again, of the importance of connection? It's wild to think about this. And of course, the thing that we all wonder is, okay, AIs can respond as if they're human and all that. I wrote an article in 2016 where I asked about consciousness, right? Like, you're conscious the way I'm conscious. We don't completely understand the science of it, and but we know it when we see it, right? Like a rock is not conscious, whereas a dog or an animal, a child is. The question is, will AI ever become self-aware, right? Will it know that it exists?
Well, I remember reading something, and I don't remember who wrote this, but I think they asked a question.
Okay.
What do you fear? And it came back and said, I fear being unplugged. And I said, why? Because I believe that humans would unplug me because they fear me. Now, I'm pretty sure I read that.
Yeah.
That's pretty. I could see it.
Yeah.
That's, to me, that it's waking up.
Yeah. Like, I think somebody said GPT-4, they tried to get it to trick a system into thinking it was human. So it contacted one of these boards where you can pay people for work, and it basically said, I'm blind, I need help answering a CAPTCHA. And so it convinced a human being through its natural language capabilities that it posed as a human being, said it was blind, can you be my CAPTCHA? And that's how it got around the requirement that the person get into the site be a human. Like, think of the creativity and reasoning it took to get there. That's intelligence, Gary. Like, it doesn't, and like, it had to be told to do that, but can it develop its own intentionality, as we say? And what happens when it does? Like, it's both exciting. It's such a fascinating question, but we're right to be fearful about it.
Right.
And that's why you may have seen recently a lot of leaders in the AI community asked for a pause on development for 6 months so we could think about the safety and ethical implications of unleashing this thing into the wild.
Yeah, because I think I even heard Putin say that, listen, whoever controls this controls the world.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's far off from that statement.
No, but the problem with this is it only works if everybody pauses for 6 months.
Yes.
Right? If you're Google, you want OpenAI and Microsoft to pause for 6 months so you can catch up. They're not going to do that, right? There's a capitalistic impulse and a survival impulse. Or you think China's going to pause if we say pause? No. Why would they pause?
Yeah, they might say it.
They might say it.
But they're not pausing.
And if the U.S. said pause, would anybody really believe that they paused? Right? So that's the conundrum that I think this involves.
Yeah. You know, the other interesting thing as well, too, is a lot of times you don't even know who you're talking to, even on social media.
Right.
With all the bots.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that creates so much political division as well.
Totally. I mean, you heard about the use of this in the 2016 election and elections more broadly. So there's just so many thorny things here.
Did you see Social Dilemma?
Yeah. Is that which one is that?
That's the one where it shows the artificial intelligence for, like, in Facebook and social media and what it does to try to keep you online for as long as possible, and just keeps feeding you what you want to see.
Feeding you content, right?
Yeah, and I can see that.
And you can see how people get radicalized, right?
So 100%.
Yeah, because the job, and we got to remember, big tech, it will say that its job is to serve you content and all that. Its job is to keep you on the site for as long as it can, because you are the product that is being sold, right? It is serving you advertising. So it's in YouTube, Facebook's interest. If you express a minor political leaning, it'll slowly start giving you more extreme variants of that, so that you are, going down the rabbit hole and have seen so much advertising.
100%.
Yeah.
Because when I look at my feed, it's all in alignment with my beliefs.
Totally.
And then I will send it over to a friend, and I'll have a friend who's on the other side send me an article or send me something from social media. And then I'll look at the responses, and it's all leaning towards his belief system. And I'm like, I can see how this polarizes people.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
I heard a good rule of thumb recently, especially with kids, and it's one I'm going to try to institute with my son. Whenever somebody comes to you with a very powerful conviction, especially an emotional conviction, say to them, okay, what is the most powerful argument that your opposition might have? Right? So you can imagine your son or daughter saying, this, and this, right? And you say, fine, what's the best argument? Why would somebody argue against that? What's the best argument they can have? And that forces you to at least try to hear the other side. Because you're right, with social media and the tailoring, you often don't get it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think it also isn't always a true representation of the real world.
No.
Like, I mean, if it really was, there'd be fist fights all over the streets all the time.
All the time.
And there isn't.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I just thought of something. You know, it'd be interesting. Let's say you ask, and I don't know if it's doing this already. What if I asked ChatGPT to do something and it can't figure it out?
Okay.
Would it go out and hire somebody in Fiverr? I wonder if that could be probably in the next version. You know what I mean?
It could be. I mean, or people. So OpenAI have released a plugin model where people can build on top of ChatGPT.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that already exists, where it'll integrate something external and hiring somebody with the intelligence of ChatGPT. Like people already thinking about this. For all
I mean, you know, and then now let's kind of go on the other side. I mean, like just so many incredible things that can come out of this.
Oh yeah.
Like where I can say, like, hey, look, is this a good business idea? I don't know if you ever asked that, but
yeah.
You know?
I mean, people have asked, you know, for software development.
Mm-hmm.
I've had, you know, people claim that it's made their teams 5 to 7x more productive because it generates all this code and it's about 80% accurate, and then you just got to massage it at the it'll result in a lot of good things, but it's so powerful and moving so fast, and I think that's what makes a lot of people, myself included, uneasy.
Right.
Because it's you know, it's training itself soon, and then like it's improving itself, and like, you know, what happens in a world, Gary, where most of the text you read is generated artificially? It's not written by a human being. Like, what happens to our ability to sift out right from wrong and stories and all that? We have no idea. We have no idea.
Can we unplug this thing? Like, will it get to a point where you can't unplug it? Do you see a time like that in the future?
Depends what you mean by it, right? It being artificial intelligence is already ubiquitous. It's in your phone. It's in your WhatsApp recommendation. It's in LinkedIn. It's everywhere.
True.
I don't know. Like, you know, yeah, the OpenAI could unplug ChatGPT. They could do that for a singular system. They won't because of what it means for them commercially. But even if they decided to do it, there's too many people working on similar systems.
Do you think this is more dangerous than nuclear?
Yes. It's funny you asked that question because nuclear weapons, nuclear capability were trade secrets guarded by large nation states, right? So like, it's not like, you know, the everyday person has the ability and the means to make a nuclear weapon, right? It's a concern. Nuclear proliferation still is a concern with rogue states and whatever, but it's still, you need sizable resource to be able to do this. This technology is accessible to anybody and quickly, right? ISIS, Russia, China, North Korea, bad actors in Canada and the US, and the things that we can do with it are so powerful. Is it more an existential threat than nuclear weapons? Maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's man, such a crazy world we live in.
It is, and I wonder. Like, I wonder if my parents thought this with computers, right? So,
right.
I gave you the example of like I wrote something, but it didn't feel like I had written it, and I wonder about the effects of that on my son. My parents might have said that about calculators, or like, you know, I remember I was never a good printer, right? My penmanship was horrible, but the minute I got a computer, I typed everything, and my mom would say, you know, that's lazy. You're not learning penmanship and so forth. Now, who actually writes a letter anymore, right? So it's not affected my life one iota. So I wonder if this is just a generational thing where we're alarmed by change, and the next generation will say, well, you know, of course we have all these things, and this is just the way we do things now. But this does feel different because it's the elimination of intellectual work. Like,
well, and I think it's also how fast it's going, right? I don't know if you've heard of Jeff Booth.
I've heard the name. Yeah.
Okay, so he wrote a book. I can't remember what it's called. Something about tomorrow. Anyways, you know, we can look it up. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
But essentially what he's saying is how fast technology is moving. And so he said, if you take a paper and you fold it 50 times, how high would it be?
Right.
And he goes, you know what it is? How high it would be?
To the moon or something, right?
Right. Yeah. We get to the moon.
Right.
People are like, what? That doesn't make any sense. But he's saying right now we are in the large folds of technology. Like we're in fold like 36, 37 out of 52.
Right.
And he goes, these folds are so large now. Now you're starting to fold buildings.
Right.
And when you get into those folds, you don't know how big that next fold is and what's going to come from it. It's kind of like Blockbuster and Netflix.
Right.
Blockbuster didn't know the internet was going to take off that quickly.
Yeah.
And they had very smart and intelligent people.
Yeah.
And it got wiped out in 1 year.
Yeah.
From just that one fold.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think we don't know, like people are using this for drug discovery. They're using it for almost everything now. And I can't keep up with the innovation. Like there's Auto GPT now, which I'm not even sure what it is yet. I haven't read about it because it's so new. And so the pace of this change is just crazy. I think that's what's the difference this time.
Yeah, even from a medical standpoint, that's interesting as well too. Like I wonder if we can help train a doctor in neuroscience or brain surgery or
and it can cure things that we've never thought of. I'm sure it could. But could somebody use it to invent a biological virus, right? That there's no cure for. The next pandemic, right?
Right.
Artificially released. Like, there's the capacity for that. And here, it's moving so fast.
Yeah.
It's moving so fast, and governments and legislation, and I made this point when I was on the National 4 months ago, they're just too slow, not of their own fault. Legislation responds to things much slower than the technology. So the things they were talking about with privacy and data training and all that, they're still pertinent, but they don't capture the full complexity of ChatGPT and the like.
Right. I mean, look, it's no different than when I worked at, like, I think of this example, TD Bank. Yeah. When you're working in a larger corporation, you got red tape. Things move slower. Right. When you're smaller, you can move things quick. You don't have all the red tapes, right? And so that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And this thing is, it can be used by individuals so quickly. That's the thing.
Yeah. How are you using it personally?
I use it for writing a little bit to, I'll if I have a particularly important email that needs to go out, I'll literally say, here's the email, where can it be improved, right? So I use it for little things like that. I use it out of curiosity in my job because I have to understand it. We as a company are using it to generate what we call synthetic data. So that what that means is AI needs data to understand and get better at things. What happens when you don't have that data? You can use the principles of ChatGPT to generate things. So we're using it in those kind of scientific ways.
Right. Where does this thing take us 5 or 10 years from now?
Gary, I don't know if we're around in 5 or 10 years. No,
that's a scary statement.
I shouldn't say that. I don't know. I used to say, given the pace of things, I didn't think I'd see a conscious machine in my lifetime, but my son would probably see it in his, right? I used to say that 4 or 5 years ago. Given what I'm now seeing, I think we probably get artificial general intelligence in 2026. And I think we get a conscious machine, whatever that might mean, in like 2030 or 2035. And I think, knock on wood, I'm around to see it. And what that portends for humanity, I don't know. Right. Is this the thing we need, for example, to live on other planets, right? To address the resource problem we have on Earth? But we are going to see changes that are going to astound you. You remember this podcast and this time, because you'll be able to say, I remember the inflection point of artificial intelligence, and I think we're living through it.
Do you think this will be a part of us, like in us, put in us? Because I know Elon Musk is trying to work on that. Is he not?
What a question. I don't know. Will you have an artificial brain that augments your real brain?
Some kind of a plug-in, something. Man, I hope not.
I don't know. I certainly hope not as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you seen any papers on that or people talking?
I mean, okay, so, take somebody who's blind from birth. they're trying to understand what's wrong with their, can they simulate sight in their mind? So even though their eyes don't work, can you have an expensive enough camera that sees everything and feeds the right thing to their brains? Like, people are working on these kind of problems. Same with people who are deaf. These are wonderful initiatives that entail a artificial human interface. So people are working on this for good things. You probably can see where this can go bad. So probably this happens, hopefully for good, right? Allows children who are deaf to hear, children who are blind to see, but like, you can see this going in strange directions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sheldon, listen, this was a very intriguing conversation.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah. I've enjoyed it. It's also maybe a little more fearful, I think. But look, I think that's life.
Yeah.
There's always good, there's always bad, and I think you just got to try to navigate your way the best through it. And there's certain things that you can't control.
Yeah.
But what is maybe some last piece of advice for somebody who's listening and maybe they want to get a little bit more familiar with it? What should they pay attention to? How should they use it? What are your kind of final thoughts?
So, there's an analogy I use from the 90s where the internet was new, right? Very new. And of course, I grew up on bulletin boards and all that, like pre-internet. And at one time we used to say to people, you have to learn this technology, because if you don't, like, you're going to be obsolete. And you can't imagine now a business, with very few exceptions, not leveraging the internet, right, in some way. I'd say the same thing's true of artificial intelligence, right? ChatGPT may be scary and new and novel. Start using it and figuring out, how do I use this in my business? Because guaranteed some of your competitors are, and they're thinking about creative ways to leverage this. And it may not seem obvious what they are, like for your business, Gary. Like, I don't know if you could use that with email outreach or whatever it is. Start getting comfortable with this tool, because pretty soon it's going to be ubiquitous and you're not going to be able to survive without it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, right? And I think it could be just as simple asking questions like, when you're starting your business, or whether it be in real estate, what are some of what are the top 5 things that a successful realtor does to be successful?
Right.
They use it for good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's when things are new, especially for us people who are older, we're set in our ways. We like to think we know the best, but like, this is a newly incredibly powerful technology. Exactly that. Make a list of the top 5 things you do in your line of work and ask yourself if you could benefit or be more productive with artificial intelligence.
Yeah. All right. So if anybody wants to learn more about you and what you do, how can they find you, or how can they reach out to you?
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn and on Twitter. They can also just go to our website, DarwinAI.ca. And, you can see all the wonderful things that we're up to. And, happy to connect with anybody who might be listening to this.
Awesome. Sheldon, right, thanks for coming in.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
All right.